Isn't it fascinating how they tried to dim your light, only to find themselves blinded by your brilliance? Let's explore the delicious irony of how their attempts to silence you became the very amplifier of your voice. You see, in their desperate effort to suppress your truth, they forgot one crucial detail. Pressure doesn't always crush things. Sometimes it creates diamonds. Think back to those moments when they thought they had you cornered, their whispers spreading like poison through the corridors of your life. Every raised eyebrow, every interrupted sentence, every accidental exclusion, all carefully orchestrated to make you question your own voice. They were so convinced of their power, conducting their symphony of silence with such precision, never realizing they were actually composing the soundtrack to their own obsolescence. The beauty of their miscalculation lies in its completeness. While they were busy building walls to contain you, you were developing the strength to shatter them. Each attempt to muzzle your voice only gave you more reason to perfect it. Like a musician practicing in forced solitude, you turned their imposed silence into your rehearsal space, crafting every word until it became a weapon they couldn't deflect. What they never understood was that silence has a sound of its own, the sound of potential energy building, of pressure accumulating, of strength gathering beneath still waters. They mistook your strategic silence for submission, your calculated restraint for defeat. Oh, how they basked in their imagined victory, not realizing they were actually witnessing the calm before a storm that would reshape their entire landscape. The transformation was gradual, but absolute. With every attempt to shut you down, you developed a new way to rise up. Their tactics became your teachers, their resistance, your strength, training. While they were congratulating themselves on each small victory and silencing you, you were alchemizing their opposition into eloquence, turning their constraints into your launching pad. Now, look at them, frozen in stunned silence as you speak truths they tried to bury. Watch how they struggle to comprehend the power of the voice they thought they had extinguished. Their speechlessness is your symphony, their shocked silence, the sweetest validation of your metamorphosis. Every word you speak now carries the weight of every word they tried to suppress, and the impact is beautifully devastating. The greatest comedy in this performance is watching them scramble to find their own voices, now that yours has become undeniable. See how they choke on the very silence they tried to force upon you, how they drown in the quiet they thought would be your grave. Their weapons have become their wounds, their tactics, their tombstones, and their planned persecution has become their public paralysis. You've become the embodiment of their worst fear, the unsilenceable truth they tried so desperately to contain. Every attempt they made to write you out of the story only made you a more compelling protagonist. Now they sit in mute witness to your ascendance, their silence no longer a weapon, but a testament to their total defeat. The irony would be cruel if it weren't so perfectly poetic. Consider how they must feel, watching you command the very attention they tried to deny you. Their carefully constructed narratives crumble with every word you speak, their orchestrated ostracism now isolating them instead. They created this monster, sculpted this phoenix, forged this unstoppable force, and now they can only watch in mute horror as their creation surpasses their control. Let's delve into the twisted psychology of those who feed on emotional chaos, like vampires at a blood bank. Narcissists, these masterful puppeteers of human emotion, have perfected the art of psychological warfare through a simple yet devastating strategy: provoking reactions. They've learned that your emotional response is their most potent fuel, each outburst a feast for their insatiable need for validation and control. Picture them as emotional alchemists, skilled in the dark art of transforming your peace into their power. Every calculated comment, every subtle jab, every theatrical display of victimhood, these are all carefully crafted experiments designed to test your emotional boundaries. They watch with predatory fascination as their words sink into your psyche, measuring success not by the logic of their arguments, but by the intensity of your response. Your anger becomes their ambrosia, your frustration, their feast, your desperation, their delight. The true genius of their manipulation lies in its cyclical nature. Like skilled conductors, they orchestrate situations designed to push you past your breaking point. Then sit back and watch the symphony of chaos unfold. Each time you react, you unwittingly validate their importance, confirm their influence, and strengthen their hold over your emotions. Your responses become the very chains they use to bind you. Each outburst, another link in their carefully crafted control. What makes their strategy so effective is its simplicity. They've learned that human emotions, when provoked, follow predictable patterns. They plant seeds of doubt, water them with subtle insults, and fertilize them with gaslighting until your emotional garden becomes a battlefield of their design. Your natural instinct to defend yourself, to seek justice, to demand recognition. These healthy human responses become weapons in their arsenal, each reaction feeding the monster they've so carefully cultivated. The real tragedy unfolds in the way they transform your strength into their sustenance. Every time you stand up for yourself in anger, every tear you shed in frustration, every moment of emotional intensity becomes proof of their power. They don't just want your attention, they crave your emotional investment, your visceral responses, your uncontrolled reactions. It's a psychological vampirism so subtle that most victims don't realize they're being drained until they're already empty. Watch how they position themselves as both the villain and the victim in this theatrical production of pain. They push you to the edge, then act surprised when you react. They create chaos, then condemn you for responding to it. Like skilled magicians, they direct all eyes to your reaction, while their manipulation remains hidden behind a curtain of calculated innocence. Your emotional response becomes their justification, your outbursts, their evidence, your pain, their pleasure. The most insidious aspect of their strategy is how it turns your natural defenses against you. Every time you try to expose their behavior, to call out their manipulation, to defend your reality, you're actually giving them exactly what they want: emotional engagement. They've learned that even negative attention feeds their narcissistic supply, that your hatred is just as nourishing as your love. Your very resistance becomes their sustenance. But here's where the game changes. When you understand that your reactions are their oxygen, you gain the power to suffocate their influence. Each time you choose not to react, you remove another log from their fire. Each moment of calculated calmness in the face of their provocations becomes a silent victory. They may escalate their efforts, becoming more outrageous in their attempts to trigger a response, but your emotional detachment becomes their kryptonite. The beautiful irony emerges when you realize that your silence is more powerful than any scream. You're calm more devastating than any storm. As you master the art of non-reaction, you watch them flounder in the face of your emotional autonomy. Their carefully crafted provocations fall flat. Their manipulation tactics lose their sting, and their power, built entirely on your reactions, begins to crumble. A broken heart can mend with time, stitched back together by new love and fresh memories. But a shattered spirit? That's an entirely different kind of wound. When narcissists wage their psychological warfare, they're not aiming for your heart. That would be too simple, too superficial for their elaborate game. No, they systematically target your soul, dismantling your sense of self, piece by precious piece, until you can't recognize your own reflection in the mirror. Like masterful demolition experts, they don't destroy everything at once. Their approach is calculated, patient, almost artistic in its cruelty. Today they might plant a seed of self-doubt. Tomorrow they'll water it with subtle criticism. And before you realize what's happening, your confidence has been replaced by a garden of uncertainties. Through love bombing turned to ice-cold indifference, through praise twisted into poison, they orchestrate a symphony of destruction that plays out in slow motion. The healing process becomes exponentially more complex because you're not just recovering from lost love, you're rebuilding your entire identity. Every small victory feels hollow because they've convinced you that you're unworthy of success. Each step forward is haunted by their voice in your head, questioning your every decision, mocking your attempts at independence. The ghost of their influence lingers long after they're gone, like psychological radiation poisoning that continues to affect everything it touches, insidiously weaving their way through the fabric of your psyche. They don't just break trust in others, they break trust in yourself. Your intuition, they've trained you to doubt it. Your boundaries, they've taught you they're selfish. Your achievements, they've convinced you they're meaningless without their validation. The damage runs so deep that even when you intellectually understand what they've done, your spirit still flinches at shadows they cast years ago. Time becomes a paradox in this healing journey. Simultaneously, your greatest ally and your most painful reminder. While physical wounds have clear stages of healing, spiritual wounds follow no such predictable pattern. One day you might feel invincible, ready to reclaim your power, and the next you're back in that dark place where their words echo through your consciousness like malevolent mantras. The spiral of recovery isn't linear because they've corrupted your very concept of progress. Watching someone piece their spirit back together after narcissistic abuse is like witnessing a phoenix attempt resurrection while still questioning whether it deserves to fly. The process requires not just healing, but complete spiritual reconstruction. Every belief must be examined, every reaction analyzed, every instinct retrained. You're not just closing wounds, you're building an entirely new foundation of self-trust on the ashes of what they destroyed. The deepest cuts come from the way they've weaponized your own mind against you. Long after they're gone, you catch yourself using their metrics to measure your worth, their twisted logic to evaluate your choices, their distorted lens to view your world. It's as if they've installed malware in your psychological operating system, and debugging becomes a full-time job. The healing process isn't just about recovering from what they did. It's about undoing what they taught you to do to yourself. Yet in this seemingly endless journey of spiritual reconstruction, there's a dark poetry to be found. Each piece of yourself you reclaim becomes stronger, than before, forged in the fire of their destruction, but tempered by your own resilience. The voice they tried to silence grows louder with each truth you reclaim, each boundary you rebuild, each moment you choose yourself over their echoing criticism. As you navigate through the labyrinth of healing, you begin to understand that while they broke your spirit, they couldn't destroy your potential for rebirth. Like a garden growing through concrete, your resilience finds ways to flourish in the most unlikely places. The very depth of the damage becomes proof of your extraordinary capacity for renewal. After all, only something truly powerful could survive such systematic destruction. The universe doesn't hand out permission slips for moving on. You have to write your own. Through the sleepless nights, through the echoing doubts, through the moments when memories play on repeat, like a broken record, you must plant your flag in the ground and declare your independence from what was. It's not about feeling ready. It's about deciding that ready or not, this is your time. The past might have written your previous chapters, but the pen is in your hands now. Every morning becomes a battlefield where you fight the same war, the war between staying stuck and stepping forward. Your disappointments will beg you to stay in bed. Your hurts will whisper sweet promises of familiar pain. Your fears will present compelling arguments for remaining exactly where you are. But this is where your decision becomes your armor. Your choice becomes your sword. You rise not because you feel like it, but because you've decided that this day will not claim another piece of your future. Watch how the simple act of deciding ripples through your existence like a stone thrown into still water. Suddenly, the questions change from, "Why did this happen to me?" to "What am I going to do about it?" The shift isn't subtle, it's seismic. Your wounds don't disappear, but they transform from anchors into fuel. Your pain doesn't vanish, but it morphs from a prison into a launching pad. This is the alchemy of decision, the magic that happens when choice meets determination. The most exquisite part of this metamorphosis is how it blindsides those who bet against your recovery. While they're still crafting their narratives about your inevitable downfall, you're quietly building your wings. Each step forward might be small, might be shaky, might be scarred, but it's yours. You're not waiting for the path to clear. You're clearing it with each deliberate step, each conscious choice, each moment you choose movement over stagnation. Notice how your decision to move forward forces others to revise their stories about you. Those who expected you to remain forever entombed in your pain now watch in confusion as you rise. Their scripts about your victimhood become obsolete as you author new chapters of resilience. This isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. About validating that inner voice that whispered enough when everything else screamed, give up. The beauty lies in the imperfection of your progress. Some days, moving forward looks like conquering mountains. Other days, it's simply refusing to slide backward. But here's the secret. The size of the step doesn't matter nearly as much as the direction. Your decision to move forward isn't measured in miles, but in moments. In the 1,000 tiny choices you make each day to honor your commitment to your own evolution. In this grand performance of recovery, your decision becomes both your director and your stage. It orchestrates your actions, curates your thoughts, choreographs your responses to life's provocations. You'll stumble. That's part of the dance. You'll doubt. That's part of the story. But with each renewal of your decision to move forward, the choreography becomes more fluid, the performance more authentic, the progress more undeniable. There's a particular kind of power that comes with realizing that moving on isn't something that happens to you. It's something that happens because of you. Your decision becomes your declaration of independence, your manifesto of movement, your rebellion against the gravity of grief. It's not about waiting for the weight to lift. It's about deciding to walk even with the weight, until walking becomes running, and running becomes flying. Consider how masterfully they twist the concept of love into something unrecognizable. Where love should be a sanctuary of mutual growth, they transform it into a prison of endless tolerance. Their demands come disguised as tests of devotion. If you really loved me, you'd understand why I hurt you. True love means accepting all of me, even the parts that break you. Watch how they weaponize the very language of love, turning your capacity for forgiveness into a tool for their continued abuse. The true perversion lies in how they manipulate the beautiful human desire for unconditional love into a blank check for their worst behaviors. Every time you forgive without consequences, every time you accept their excuses, every time you swallow their lies for the sake of peace, you're not feeding love. You're feeding their conviction that they're entitled to your endless tolerance. It's a psychological sleight of hand, so subtle that most victims don't realize they're being conned until they're emotionally bankrupt. Like skilled counterfeiters, they present tolerance as love's twin, but examine it closely, and you'll see the forgery. Real love has boundaries because it respects both parties. Their version demands the systematic dismantling of all protective barriers. Real love nurtures growth. Their version requires stagnation in toxicity. Real love uplifts. Their version demands you stay low enough to endure their heights of destructive behavior. The exchange rate between your authenticity and their approval becomes increasingly costly. The genius of their manipulation lies in its gradual escalation. Today's tolerance becomes tomorrow's baseline, and they'll always push for more. Like emotional inflation, what once seemed like an unreasonable demand becomes the new normal, and your capacity to endure must constantly expand to accommodate their growing sense of entitlement. They don't want your heart. They want your submission wrapped in the language of love. Pay attention to how they respond when you attempt to establish boundaries. A person seeking love will respect limits. A person seeking tolerance will rage against them. Their reaction to hearing no tells you everything about their true desires. Watch how quickly their charm evaporates when you refuse to tolerate the intolerable. How swiftly their love turns to venom when you dare to protect your own well-being. The most insidious part of their strategy is how they use your own capacity for love against you. Your ability to see the good in others becomes a trap. Your hope for their change becomes your prison. Your willingness to forgive becomes your weakness. They study your heart, not to cherish it, but to learn how many blows it can take before you finally realize that what they're offering isn't love at all. It's a life sentence of perpetual accommodation. This realization often comes with a devastating clarity. All those times you thought you were proving your love, you were actually demonstrating your willingness to be mistreated. The unconditional love they claim to seek was merely a smokescreen for their true desire, unconditional permission to remain unchanged, unchallenged, and unaccountable. Their greatest fear isn't losing your love. It's facing the consequences of their actions. The breaking point arrives when you finally understand that their request for tolerance is actually a demand for complicity in your own diminishment. Every time they push your boundaries, they're not testing your love. They're measuring your willingness to participate in your own destruction. The moment you withdraw your unlimited tolerance is the moment they reveal their true face, proving that it was never about love at all. And now, as you stand firm in your refusal to tolerate the intolerable, they find themselves speechless, confronting a truth they never expected, that their demand for endless tolerance has met its limit.